Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight at the sixth and final webinar in our series, marking the 90th commemoration of the Holodomor in Ukraine. It is a pleasure to be with you this evening from the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, which is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, with whom we gratefully share this land. My name is Valentina Coreliu. I worked as a department head of history with 35 years of teaching experience, mostly with the Toronto District School Board. Presently, I serve as the Director of Education of the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium, commonly known as HREC, at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, University of Alberta, with offices in Toronto. HREC was established in 2013, thanks to the generous support of the Temerte Foundation, for which we are very grateful. I am also the chair of the National Holodomor Education Committee of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Because it is now the ending of the 90th anniversary years commemorating Ukraine's genocide, for which we created this Webinars for Educators series, focusing on recently published historical fiction centering on the Holodomor, we hope that you will use some of these novels in various ways in your classrooms. I am proud to introduce our host for this evening, Mateusz Swieclicki, who is an assistant professor at the University of Wrocław, Institute of English Studies in Poland. He is the director of the Center for Young People's Literature and Culture and a co-founder of the Center for Research on Children's and Young Adult Literature. Mateusz has been a research scholar at the University of Florida's Department of English, Kosciuszko Foundation Fellowship, a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Illinois in Chicago, a visiting scholar at the University of Toronto, and has held multiple other fellowships in Munich, Kyiv, and at Harvard. Dr. Swieclicki is the author of more than 60 scholarly publications in English, Polish, Ukrainian, and Croatian. His work appears in many journals, including Children's Literature and Education and Bookbird. He is the deputy editor-in-chief of Philoteknos, a member of the editorial team of John Benjamin Publishing's Children's Literature, Culture, and Cognition series, and a representative of the Childhood and Youth Network of the Social Science History Association. His book, Next Generation Memory and Ukrainian Canadian Children's Historical Fiction, The Seeds of Memory, examines the transnational entanglements of Canada and Ukraine. Thank you for being here tonight to host us. We look forward to your insights.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you so much. It's my great honor to introduce our today's special guest, Erin Litteken, who is an award-winning novelist with a degree in history and a passion for research. At a young age, she was captivated by stories of her family's harrowing experiences in Ukraine before, during, and after the Second World War. Erin has published two novels, The Memory Keeper of Kyiv and The Lost Daughters of Ukraine, which are inspired by her family roots in Ukraine and depict Ukraine's complex history. Since its publication in 2022, The Memory Keeper of Kyiv has become a global bestseller. Set in Ukraine during the famine and in the US in 2004, Erin's first novel is a story of the resilience of the human spirit, the love that sees us through our darkest hours, and the true horror of what happened during the Holodomor. The Memory Keeper of Kyiv has now been translated into 16 languages and has won 2 awards, the She Reads Best Historical Fiction of 2022 and the 2023 Women's Fiction Writers Association Star Award. Moreover, it reached the top of Amazon's charts, was Pinterest's recommended summer read, one of Fortune magazine's new page-turning novels you should read this summer, and BookBub's featured new releases. Erin lives in Illinois, USA, with her husband and children. Erin, the floor is now yours for a reading from your wonderful historical fiction novel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction. So I will jump right into reading my selection. The leaves crunched under her feet as she crept through the woods behind the house, their noise echoing like gunshots. Her nerves sparked with awareness, and her eyes never stopped scanning the far corners of the land. With activist guards patrolling the countryside and neighbors desperate to take any food they could find, she couldn't afford to relax for 1 second. Tall and thick, the pale, barkless tree stood in sharp relief against the inky sky. Before the last raid on their house, she'd hidden a jar filled with rye flour in the hollow of the crack and covered it with rocks. Disappointment made her shoulders slump as she sank to the ground and saw the rocks were gone. The knobby roots of the ancient oak stabbed into her knees as she pawed through the dead leaves and pebbles until her fingers bled, but it was useless. Someone or something had taken the flour. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stared down at the trails of mud and blood her hands left behind. Think, Katya. She had to fix this. She had to bring food home tonight. The moon peeked through the clouds, barely visible in the black, starless night, and an idea flitted into her head, unbidden. Maybe I could sneak onto the collective field and take a bit of food. She knew it was a terrible idea as soon as it occurred to her. Stalin had issued a decree in August stating that anyone caught taking any produce from a collective field could be shot on sight or imprisoned for stealing property. There were only a few fields still left to be harvested, and armed guards patrolled them on foot and horseback or from watchtowers. But what other choice did she have? She couldn't let her family starve. She couldn't let her sister die. Katya brushed herself off and stiffened her backbone. Her feet dragged as she took those first steps, but she'd already made her decision. She walked through the woods and approached the back end of the field at a snail's pace, slinking from tree to tree until she could almost reach out and touch the rustling corn stalks. So much food grew right in front of her, sowed by her family and her neighbors and herself. They would reap it soon, but taste none of it. She glanced around, assessing her options. The long, flat field held only one guard tower off in the distance. She couldn't be sure, but she didn't think the guard could see anyone lurking behind the trees this far away. Katya edged forward on her belly, sweat prickling the back of her neck. Fear, thick and oily, choked her until she was panting as she crawled, inch by inch, toward the rustling corn. This field was feed corn, typically used for livestock, but it would fill her family's bellies all the same. She pictured Halia's hungry face, then swallowed down the apprehension so that it settled into a hard knot in her gut. She shot to her feet, hidden under the tall brown stalks. As noiselessly as she could, she ripped off the ears of corn and stuffed them into her shirt. Her belt caught them at her waist, and they filled out her clothing in sharp contrast to her narrowed, empty abdomen. When she'd gotten as much as she could reasonably carry, she emerged from the field and slunk back along the ground toward the forest, not breathing until she reached the cover of the trees. As she melted into the woods, she sucked in a lungful of the night air and closed her eyes, relief making her sweat-soaked body tremble. She'd no sooner congratulated herself on the partial victory than a high-pitched voice rang out in the quiet night. "Stop! Thief!" Shock froze her for a moment, but common sense prevailed, and she bolted. No shots rang out, and she wondered at the identity of her assailant. The voice sounded young, perhaps not a guard, but one of the young pioneers. Katya still couldn't believe how thorough the Communist Party was in its indoctrination efforts. Even the school children were drafted into the Young Pioneers program and encouraged to report anyone with illegal goods, including family members. And they did. Katya had been appalled when the neighbors down the road had been turned in by their 10-year-old son for hiding grain. When the voice rang out again, this time much closer to her, Katya halted, certain now that she was hearing a young child. If she didn't stop the ruckus he was making, he would surely draw the attention of an armed and less easily manipulated assailant before she could escape. She clenched her fists and turned around. The boy ran toward her and puffed up his chest. "I command you to come with me and turn yourself in," he ordered, his voice deepening in his best imitation of a man. Katya recognized the boy. She used to watch him during harvest season. He must only be 11 or 12 by now. Anger coursed through her, straightening her back and raising her chin. This child thought he could stop her from saving her starving niece. Katya's emotions exploded, taking over her common sense as they had when she was younger, and she marched up to him and slapped him across the face. He gasped and raised a hand to his cheek incredulously. "You can't do that." "Ivan Yarkov," Katya whispered as fiercely as she could, "you should be ashamed of yourself." "You can't speak to me like that either," he replied, his voice now shaky with uncertainty at her lack of fear and respect. "I could have you shot. I changed your pants when you were small and chased you in the yard while you waddled around. I'm like family to you, yet you choose the state over me?" He looked around, unsure what to make of her tirade, but Katya didn't give him time to think. "My niece is dying because she has no food. I work in fields like this every day. Every day. Do I get any of that grain for myself? Do I?" "No," he said. "But the state gives you food. That's how it works. You work for the state, and the state takes care of everyone. And as a young pioneer, it's my job to help the state take care of everyone." He brightened a bit as he rationalized his actions to himself, but his gaunt cheeks told another story. His precious state didn't give him enough food either. Ivan, you're telling me that this state giving me one piece of bread a day for my labor should be enough for my sick sister, my mother, my baby niece, and me? Katya asked. No, it's ridiculous. It is cruel, and I will not stand to hear it from a child. And you're one to talk. You look terrible. Are they taking such good care of you? He shrunk a bit in his boots. I said no, Katya spoke as loudly as she dared, her voice quaking with fury. You listen to me, Ivan. The village is dying because of this damn state, and you're helping. Shame on you as a Ukrainian for abandoning your people when they need you most. Poor Ivan had no idea what to say to that. His eyes grew wide and his lower lip quivered as it fell open. I'm going to walk away now, and you should go home, Katya said. If you have any brains in that thick head or an ounce of compassion in your heart, you'll forget you saw me. His mouth clicked shut. He nodded slightly, and as Katya turned to walk away, she looked back over her shoulder. Forget you saw me, Ivan, but do not forget what I said. You are helping to kill your people. Someday it will come back to haunt you. Katya didn't look back again to see his response. She meant everything she said, but despite the exhilaration she felt at speaking her mind, it wasn't a wise thing to do. He could still report her, and they would take his word over hers. Even when she made it home, her nerves wouldn't settle. Her hands shook as she helped Mama scrape off the corn and cook it down into a mush, saving the cobs to soak and eat later. Mama fed Halia and Alina as much as they would eat before splitting the remainder between herself, Katya, and Kolya. Why do you keep looking out the window? Kolya asked as she put away the dishes. His shrewd eyes appraised her as if he could see all of her secrets, and her face reddened. I like looking at the night sky. Later, when Mama went to bed, he tried again. What happened tonight? You can tell me, you know. We're in this together. His mournful gaze fell on Alina's pale, sweat-soaked face. We are, she agreed, but the fewer people who knew about her illegal acts, the better. At the very least, it would protect him from having to cover for her if he was asked by the state. Nothing happened. She rocked back and forth to lull Halia to sleep. I fetched some corn. We fed Halia and Alina. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either, and somehow she knew he realized that. If you say so. His voice lacked conviction, but he didn't press her. Be safe out there. Of course, I'm always safe. For days, Katya looked over her shoulder, waiting to be arrested. Ivan could turn her in at any time, and that weighed heavily on her, but she was happy to bear that burden if it bought Alina and Halia a few more days of life. So that is a section from the 1930s period of the storyline. And then my other section is from the modern part of the modern storyline in my book. So that takes place in 2004 in Illinois. Bertie's down for the night. Cassie slumped onto the couch next to Bobby. What are you doing? Looking at this, Pisanka. She rolled the egg between her arthritic fingers, then held it out toward Cassie. Your mother made this one. Cassie took the finely detailed egg, dyed in the traditional way using wax to create intricate designs in layers of different colors. Pisanki eggs were an integral part of Ukrainian Easter celebrations. We haven't made any in years, Cassie said. I loved helping when I was a little girl. We could teach Bertie, Bobby said. The phone rang and she reached over to answer it. Hello? Cassie's curiosity piqued as Bobby's eyes grew wide. Yes, I'll give money. Wait, I'll get my wallet. She tried to pull herself up from the couch, but Cassie put a hand on her arm. Who's on the phone? Who do you want to give money to? Bobby pushed at her. Go get my wallet. It's the state police. They need money. Let me have the phone. Cassie held her hand out. Bobby gave her a dirty look, but acquiesced. Hello, can I help you? Cassie said. She listened for a few moments. No, thank you. Please take us off your list. As she set the phone back on the receiver, Bobby grabbed her hand. When they call, you give them money. If you don't, they will come for you in the night, take you away, and no one will ever see you again. Cassie's mouth dropped open. Bobby, they were asking for donations for the State Troopers Scholarship Fund. You don't have to give money to them. Nobody will come get you in the night. This isn't Ukraine. That's what they want you to think. They come when you aren't ready, but I was always ready. I had a bundle packed. Ready for what? Cassie asked, even though she knew the answer from her time with Nick in the journal. Siberia, Sasha, the deportations. Bobby was flashing back to her time in Ukraine again. Bobby wrung her hands and ignored the question as she scanned the room like a caged animal. Cassie's mind raced for a distraction. In a light voice, she said, tell me what you would pack to be ready. Bobby's terror-filled eyes locked on hers. I packed warm clothes and blankets. They put you on cattle cars and send you to the gulags. It's very cold, and they don't give you blankets. That was smart to pack blankets. Here, why don't you lie back and rest, and I'll go look for a bag. Cassie spoke in a calming tone as she dimmed the lights. I packed food, too, Bobby went on, but her voice had quieted. When I could, but we didn't always have food to pack. That must have been very hard. Cassie leaned over and smoothed her hair. How about I take care of all that? Why don't you close your eyes and rest a bit, okay? For a little bit, Bobby agreed. I am tired, but don't forget to pack our things. I'll sit here with you until you fall asleep, and then I'll pack. Thank you, Alina, Bobby mumbled. Cassie startled. Alina, her sister. What had happened to Alina, and why did she still haunt Bobby? After a few minutes, Cassie crept down the hall to peek in on Bertie. She slept peacefully, one arm slung over her head, legs dangling off the bed. Cassie planted a soft kiss on her forehead, then straightened at the sound of Bobby talking. On tiptoe, as to not startle her grandmother, she crept back down the hall and stopped when she saw Bobby sitting up on the couch. Alina, Bobby said quietly, are you here? The silence echoed around them. So much has happened since I lost you. She paused, waiting for a response. I have a great-granddaughter now. Would you believe I lived long enough to see such a thing? I've been telling her stories about when we were girls. She gave a low sob, then went on, the raw grief in her voice so tangible, Cassie winced. I'm sorry, Alina. I'm sorry for everything that happened. I never meant to hurt you. I hope you know that. I light the candle so you can come back to me, but I think I've failed you too much. The clock chimed, announcing the hour. Bobby closed her eyes, and Cassie could feel her grandmother willing something to happen, someone to speak. Her pulse raced as she watched the tragic scene. As crazy as it was, she almost expected Alina to manifest in front of her. But there was only silence. Gingerly, Bobby lay down next to the spot Bertie talked to and raised her hand out towards the nothingness. Tears ran in crooked courses down her grooved cheeks. I'll keep waiting, Alina. She closed her eyes, and her breathing evened out. Cassie inched closer and watched her shoulders rise and fall in a steady rhythm. When she was convinced Bobby was asleep, she ran to the kitchen. If she couldn't read the journal on her own, then maybe researching what life was like in Ukraine back then could give her some insight. She plugged the internet cable into her laptop and, for once, grateful for her mom's pushiness, punched in the login information stuck on the refrigerator, then opened up the search bar and typed Ukraine 1930s. The first entries shocked her. Holodomor, death by hunger, terror famine, Stalin, death toll estimates from 4 to 10 million. The horrific words screamed out at her from the screen. Pictures of bloated bellies and emaciated bodies both drew her in and repulsed her at the same time. Children with large heads perched on spindly bodies stared out with haunted eyes. Cassie blanched as she clicked on picture after picture. Oh my God, she whispered. How did I not know about this? If she lived through a forced famine, it's no wonder she hoards food. What's a famine? Bertie's little voice piped up. I thought you were in bed. Cassie slammed the computer screen down so her daughter wouldn't see the pictures. A famine is when people don't have enough food. They get very hungry. Oh, yeah, Bertie nodded in an understanding way that belied her young age. Alina and Katya were really hungry all the time. I heard all about it. From who? Cassie wondered. But before she could press for more answers, her mom came in the back door. Hello, Anna bent and kissed Bertie on the cheek. Why don't you go pick out a few books for me to read to you? Wait in your room and I'll be right there. Never one to turn down a story, Bertie ran down to her room. As soon as she was out of earshot, Cassie opened the computer again and spun it towards her mom. Look at this. Have you heard of the Holodomor? No. Why? Anna scrolled through the page for a few minutes and then went pale. This is terrible. I know, Cassie said, and I'm pretty sure Bobby lived through it. Anna shook her head. No way. I would have known. My parents would have talked about it. Maybe it was too hard. I had a good childhood, Anna went on, ignoring Cassie. A comfortable house, home-cooked meals every day, parents who loved me. We were happy. But what about before they came to America? We never heard anything about that. I don't know. They didn't talk about it, but life here was normal. My mother and father were so in love. He used to bring her flowers every Friday night after work, and she'd light up when she saw him. Anna chuckled. Every time, like it was a big surprise, even though he never missed a week. They'd sit in the garden, snuggle up together while I caught fireflies in the summer and hold hands when we went ice skating in the winter. And the three of us were happy, and their love formed the foundation for it all. Her smile faded. We struggled so much after we lost him, but it helped me knowing he had a good 79 years on this earth. Or I thought he did. Cassie touched her mom's shoulder. It sounds like he had a wonderful life, but that doesn't mean there weren't harder parts. Anna rubbed the back of her neck. I guess there were little signs. Mama never let me waste food no matter what. She used to say, bread is life. You always eat it. And there were those few times when my father was sad, like that day in the garden, but that's normal. This, Anna nodded towards the computer, this is anything but normal. Experiencing a forced famine would explain both those things and the recent food hoarding, Cassie said gently. But it's hard to believe. How could she bear so much grief and still be such a wonderful mother to me? Anna stood. Maybe we should go talk to her. No, Cassie folded her arms. She shuts down. That's the whole reason she wants Nick to read the journal to me. We need to finish it first to see what it says, and then we can decide how to approach her. Grammy, are you coming? Bertie walked back in the kitchen, a stack of books in her hands. I'm sorry, sweetie. I'll be right there. Anna started after Bertie, but then she turned back to Cassie. Fine, we can wait, but please move it along. If this is what really happened to her, I can't stand to think of her reliving it.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was really powerful. You're of Ukrainian heritage, and both of your critically acclaimed novels are devoted to Ukrainian history and culture and demonstrate the strength of women. In the author's note, you admit that the character of Bobby, or Katya, in The Memory Keeper of Kyiv, is based on one of your family members. Can you tell us something about your own giver of memory and the role family stories played in developing the story?
Yes. The Bobby from my book is heavily inspired by my memories of my own Ukrainian great-grandmother, who she wanted us to call her Bobby too, so that she was my Bobby. And she lived with us when I was a child, and I spent a lot of time with her. We were very close, and it was a wonderful relationship. So I grew up knowing that we had this beautiful connection to Ukraine, and knowing about her culture and her heritage and her language and her stories. They were just always a part of our life. I can't remember the first time I heard the stories about how she and her family were able to escape their village as it was being, bombed and destroyed during World War II, and then travel to a refugee camp and eventually make their way to America. It was just stories that she told, stories my grandfather told, and stories my mom told that my grandmother had told her. So it was just this, it was always being talked about, and it was always a part of my life. And it really fascinated me at a young age and made me want to learn more about it. So as I got older, went to college and started studying history, I wanted to place those family stories into the context of real history. And I began that research heavily, trying to understand where our family memories fit into the true history. And as I did that, I started with World War II and those stories that I had heard. But I also went back further into the 30s and learned more about the Holodomor, which I did not know a lot about. My family, my great-grandparents were from what is now Western Ukraine. So during the interwar period, it was under Polish rule, not Soviet rule. So they did not live through the Holodomor themselves. They had family members that did and connections to people who did, but that wasn't their story, but it was part of Ukraine's story. And so those memories and stories that she shared with me sent me on this path to learning more about Ukrainian history. And when I found out more about the Holodomor and how horrible it was, how intentional it was at trying to destroy Ukraine, and I realized how few people knew about it and how little I knew about it myself, I knew I wanted to start there and tell that story. So even though this first book wasn't directly from my family stories, it was definitely inspired by and motivated by the connection I had to my family and our stories from Ukraine.
Thank you. And now you are the keeper of memory, yeah?
Yes, I'm trying. I'm trying to pass it on to my children.
The Memory Keeper of Kyiv has two timelines, yeah, and takes place in Ukraine and North America. Some of the chapters are set in Ukraine during the Holodomor, while the others in the US in 2004. I find your choice of the year important as your characters belatedly discover their Ukrainian roots and become aware of the famine right before the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and the official recognition of the Holodomor as a genocide. Your novel has played an important role in introducing global readers unfamiliar with Ukrainian history to the Holodomor. Can you share some of the most surprising or most interesting reader responses to The Memory Keeper of Kyiv?
Yeah, it's largely been really wonderful responses, but they kind of fall into three categories, I would say. The first two are reactions from people in the Ukrainian diaspora who, and half of them know about the Holodomor and they've heard stories from their families. And so they'll read the book and reach out to me and tell me that this really sounded a lot like what my family went through. And this was really great to see in a historical fiction novel because I've heard these stories and I'm glad it's out there, in the world now. And then there's people who didn't know about it. Their family members didn't talk about it, whether it was because of the trauma was too great to revisit or because they were scared to talk about it because it was oppressed for so long. And so these people are reading these stories, my book, and reaching out and telling me that this is filling in blanks for them that they didn't understand about their family. This is giving them insight into what their family could have lived through and kind of serving as a springboard for them to research further and find out more about what their family's life were like. And so those are really interesting and gratifying responses to hear from readers. One I didn't anticipate was, I didn't write this book I wrote it long before this current escalation of the invasion of Ukraine. And so now that it is out at this same time, I've had a lot of book group responses people who have no connection to Ukraine. They don't know anything about any of this. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to see how shocked and horrified they are that they didn't learn about it in school, that it was never present in any of their history books or textbooks, and they're horrified by it. But it's serving as kind of a jumping off point for them to understand the context of this war a little better and understand Ukrainian history a little better. And so it's really been a privilege of mine to be able to shine a little bit of light on this piece of Ukrainian history in hopes giving people a better understanding of what's going on now and hopefully raising more support and awareness in the process.
Thank you. That's really important what you've said about the role this book has played in introducing global, let's say, readers, not only to the Holodomor, but also to Ukraine in general. And I know that this book has helped many people to understand the Ukraine's complex history. A different question. The Memory Keeper of Kyiv was initially announced as Beneath the Sunflowers. While there are a few characters who play the role of memory keepers in the novel, I am curious about the tentative title, which is more symbolic. And I know that sunflowers are important in this book. Poppies are important in your second book. So I'm sure that the reference to sunflowers was not incidental. So can you explain the meaning of this tentative title?
Yes, I love this question because I loved my working title and I was very sad to see it go. But as a debut author, you don't get a whole lot of say in what the title or cover will be. You kind of have to trust the publisher and trust that they know how to place the book and market the book in the best way. But Beneath the Sunflowers came, like you said, there's a very literal reference to this, patch of sunflowers that the two sisters have, and they kind of escape there, and it's their little getaway from the world. But on a more metaphorical level, sunflowers are, very clearly a symbol of Ukraine. And I loved the idea of thinking of this strength that flows beneath the sunflowers, this, inherent might and tenacity running through all Ukrainians. And so much of that stems from their connection to the earth and this beautiful, rich black soil that they've, fought for generations, that blood, sweat, and tears has poured into for generations. And still these beautiful, strong, resilient sunflowers rise up and grow there. And so I love the imagery of that beauty and strength and tragedy all woven together. And flowers were such an important part of my great-grandmother's life and Ukrainian culture. And so actually the working title of my second book was Beyond the Poppies. So I liked the flower metaphors there, but I did not win my title battle. So
I love the original titles. So for me, you're the winner. I also like the regular titles, but I really love the original ones. And also, when it comes to sunflowers come from North America. So I think that there's another link, between Ukraine and North America, when it comes to the title. You have a remarkable ability to write stories that appeal to different types of readers. The Memory Keeper of Kyiv defines the lines between mainstream historical fiction, women's fiction, and young adult fiction. While you do not avoid details in your portrayal of the famine, your novel is not overly graphic and can be used in the classroom. Which parts of The Memory Keeper were the most difficult to write? Was it a challenge to stay historically accurate, but also hopeful?
Yes, definitely. It's a fine line to walk, to be true to history, but to present it in a way that isn't so disturbing that it will turn the reader off. The historian in me wanted to be as explicit as possible and show the audience the absolute worst parts of what happened, because I think the victims deserve that acknowledgement. And I think we as a world need to recognize that as an important piece of history. But the writer in me also wanted to make sure it was accessible to a wide variety of people and that it wouldn't make people want to set the book down because it was just too much. I think the story has to get out there more and in as many ways as possible. So yeah, in writing that, I tried to walk that line. As far as what was difficult to write, those scenes themselves, reading those firsthand accounts and the primary sources was very emotionally draining and very, very tough mentally. But it was important. And so I would take breaks when I needed to and walk away from it when I needed to, but I always came back to it because I feel it's such an important story to tell. And I feel even in trying to walk that line, it's vital to be historically accurate, because not everybody is going to pick up a nonfiction book or read a documentary, but they might pick up a novel. And if my book could be that springboard for them to want to learn more or to want to explore what else is out there to find out more about it that way, then I wanted to be as factual as possible. And that meant learning all the parts of the history and portraying it as best I could.
And your book is historically accurate, and I think that's one of its greatest. That's one of your greatest accomplishments. It's readable, it's captivating, but it's also historically accurate. One of the most important characters in the novel is Birdie, a traumatized child trying to work through her trauma with the use of art. Birdie is also the link between various other characters and the one who ignites the transmission of memory. Some characters who survive the famine, including Katya and Halia, reappear in your second novel, The Lost Daughters of Ukraine, set during the Second World War. Have you considered writing a book about Birdie and her role as the new North American memory keeper of Ukrainian history and culture?
I have not, but it's a really intriguing idea because, I think it's Ukrainian history and culture has been oppressed for so many generations, and now we're seeing it under attack again. It's so important that we have those memory keepers and that those oral stories continue to be told and passed down through the generations. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us, especially anybody with any bit of Ukrainian heritage, to try and learn that family history, talk to your grandparents, to your aunts and uncles and parents, and try and learn those stories and tell your children and keep those memories alive. Keep planting those seeds of memories. To give a nod to your book, which I just love that imagery right there as well, because that's what it is. We're planting those seeds so that future generations can learn and grow from those stories, which are so important to all of us.
Thank you for your great answer. Thank you for referencing my book.
I loved your book.
Yeah, so you have another idea for a book, but can you tell us something about your upcoming book projects? Because I'm sure that you're working on something. Are you working on another Ukraine-related historical novel?
Yes.
We're all curious to hear more about it. So
yes, I have my third novel does have it is about a Ukrainian piece of history post World War II, and I'm really excited about it, but I can't share too much about it yet because it's just with my agent now. So I hope to be able to share news about it with everybody soon, but I am excited to do one more Ukrainian novel at least.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So we'll have to wait and see. And I will read it for sure, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's looking forward to reading your next book. And Erin, once again, congratulations on your tremendous success. And you mentioned we talked about the titles of the book, and I think that an important thing is also the cover. And those of you who are interested in publishing, I highly recommend checking Erin's website, where all of the translated covers are available, and they're so different. So the very last question, Erin, which cover is your favorite one?
That's hard. There's so many that are so different. I love what France did with the original one with the blue and yellow.
The blue one.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the Petrokiva design there. I love the more unique ones. The Czech one is pretty interesting because it's very, very different. And you can definitely see which ones took a more commercial slant with the woman facing away, with the flowers. There's that slant. But I like the more unique ones, I think, better. Probably France or the Czech Republic.
I also like the unique ones. So I'm glad that we agree. Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. Valentina, do you have any comments you want to make at this time before we move forward with a Q&A?
Yes, I definitely do. And I want to congratulate you, Erin. I enjoyed the historical, parts of it that you were describing so vividly. And you did a wonderful job with that. And I'm looking forward to your third novel, definitely. So I think it's a wonderful book for adults and also for senior students. The storyline is based on a journal that was hidden by the grandmother of the family, Bobby, who finally decided in her late years to present the information about her early life to her great-granddaughter before she passed away. It is set both in the Ukrainian village in the 30s and in the United States in 2004, and goes back and forth between the events in the two different time periods of one family. The American family members had no idea about what happened to Bobby in her past life in Soviet Ukraine. The author describes in detail the life of this family and its extended members very well, as the village, and especially the village life during the Holodomor and what happens. Several chapters emphasize Stalin's policies that were forced on the population to gather the last stalks of grain from the Ukrainian farmers in their fields and the process of collectivizing Soviet Ukraine. The story brings out very vividly the destruction of the traditional way of life in the Ukrainian village through collectivization of property, equipment, and livestock, and the creation of kolkhozs, turning the successful independent farmers in Ukraine into slave laborers working for the state if they managed to survive. In particular, chapter 15 describes the role of toxins and their importance for ordinary people who, if they had any valuables, could exchange it for bread to be able to survive during the famine. It is obvious throughout the book that this family and their neighbors did everything possible to keep their children and themselves alive, even when the last bit of food was taken away. The resilience of the Ukrainian people is evident even under these terrible circumstances. Other aspects of the Holodomor are also well described in detail in the book, and excerpts from these passages can be used in the classroom very easily by teachers. For teachers, although this is a historical fiction, they should know that the factual information in this book is well researched and historically correct. So I was very proud of what you did. I think it's very, very good. The day-to-day life in a village and the actions of the government officials towards the farming population provide many examples of human rights abuses during the Holodomor. And it is an easy task for students to be given an assignment and to find examples of such abuses in these passages from the book.
Thank you so much, Valentina. We already have 2 questions, so let me read the first one. Mateusz talked about your book's crossover appeal between readers of women's fiction and readers of historical fiction. What is compelling to you about the lens of women's fiction, and what does it offer the reader that more general historical fiction might not offer?
Well, I think it's another audience base. I think there are diehard historical fiction fans, and there are people who don't necessarily pick up historical fiction. And in trying to bridge that, I hoped to reach a wider audience and just make the book accessible to more people. I didn't do it necessarily just thinking about it in a marketing fashion in that way. I did it in the dual timeline with a more modern women's fiction storyline because I wanted to show the connections between the past and the present and how important it is to know your roots and where you came from and those family stories and how they can strengthen and influence you even in the future. And that's something I think our society has gotten away from a lot, isn't appreciating the past and knowing what's going on. And so I wanted to just try and bring attention to that and highlight the importance of that.
Thank you. Another question. I love your novels, and so does my mother, whose first memories were growing up in a DP camp. I noticed that some of the characters in The Memory Keeper reappear in The Lost Daughters of Ukraine. Could you share a little more about how you made connections to The Memory Keeper and The Lost Daughters? And will your future novel feature any of your earlier characters?
So in Memory Keeper, the little girl that Katya is working so hard to save, her niece, Halia, is one of the main characters in Lost Daughters. And I wanted to show that connection of these people who did survive the Holodomor still had to deal with World War II and all of the horrors that came with that. So it was just so many years of this really oppression and horrible life where people were trying to take your land and fighting in your villages and right in front of you. So I wanted to show what Ukrainians went through there, and I wanted to draw those connections for people. As for book 3, one of the characters in my mind is a character from the other books, but it remains to be seen if she will come out as an actual character or not. I think that's going to depend on how it pans out in editing. But in my mind, she is one of the characters from the original story.
So we're looking forward to reading it even more now, knowing that there may be a character who'll make a special appearance. Another question: how do you envision or develop your characters? They have a way of fully embodying the historical events in a way that is very relatable to us today. Did you have trouble with any of the characters?
I wouldn't say specifically I had trouble with any of them, but I think it's definitely a process, a layering process. When I draft, I write the story with as much of the historical facts as I can. And then I go back through a lot, adding in layers and pieces of backstory and bringing those characters to life. So I kind of always know what their outcome is going to be. And then I weave the story in that way around the history. In making like some of the female characters, it's drawing those connections is sometimes trickier to make them be able to relate to each other, especially when I'm looking across different timelines like that, making the modern timeline try to be relevant in comparison to the horrors of what was going on in 1930s Ukraine. That wasn't easy because nothing anybody went through in 2004 in Illinois could compare to what Ukrainians were going through during the Holodomor. So I tried to weave in the connection to emotions. You know, nothing Cassie went through was that bad, but she did experience grief. And that's a human emotion we're all familiar with in some way or other. So I tried to draw those connections that way.
Thank you. And you definitely succeeded. Another question. Is there any part of the novel that particularly moves you or still gets to you every time you still read it again? Can you share what event in the novel that is, if so?
There's probably two places that come to mind. And the one I can't really talk about because I guess it would kind of spoil the story for anybody who hasn't read it. But at the end of the book, when Bobby's character finally opens up and talks to her family about everything she went through and the choices she had to make, and she finally kind of lets those emotions come out and reconciles with what she did and what the consequences of those choices were. That was an emotional one to write because I know so many of those choices people made, people in similar situations to her, they weren't really choices. They were just forced upon them. And that was just what they had to do. But nonetheless, you still live with the ramification of what happened there. And that's a hard thing to deal with. And so that was hard. And also the scenes with the children and the scenes, you know, just kind of depicting the horror of what happened in the villages. Those are always pretty moving to read because I remember the primary sources that I'm getting these ideas from and the stories that people are telling that really happened. You know, I'm writing this fiction book, but I know that it's based in a lot of fact. And that's always difficult to know.
And I think that's why it's so important for historical novels to be historically accurate. And unfortunately, not all authors of historical fiction pay attention to such details, but it's of tremendous importance, especially if we're talking about books which can be read by young people, which can be read by children, which can be used in the classroom. What message do you most want to get across either about the Holodomor or humanity that you want the reader to walk away with?
First and foremost, I want people to recognize that it happened. There are still people who deny that it happened the way it did, and people who don't want to recognize that it was a genocide of Ukrainian people. And so that's absolutely the message that I think needs to get out there. But in conjunction with that, it's important to see the strength and resilience of Ukrainians and what they're doing right now as they're fighting and protecting their land and defending their freedom is the same thing they've had to do for generations. And so the message that Ukrainians are strong and they will persevere and they will win is something I hope people can come away from with this.
When it comes to the Memory Keeper, it's hopeful, but it's not naive. Doesn't seem naive. It seems genuine. There's a loss, there's grief, but there's hope. You truly succeeded in showcasing the atrocities, but also the strength of humanity without just sugarcoating history. And I think that's a great accomplishment. And this can also be said about your second novel, in which the Holodomor is also mentioned, and the lingering trauma of the Holodomor is mentioned. So even though the novel is set during the Second World War, the Holodomor is still there. Yeah, the trauma, that's very significant. So we're looking forward to reading your third book. I highly recommend reading The Memory Keeper and choosing bits and pieces of this novel in the classroom. I think that all teachers should read this book, especially teachers who have limited knowledge of Ukraine, limited knowledge of the Holodomor. It's comprehensible, it's captivating, it can guide educators, it can help educators understand how important talking about the Holodomor in the classroom is. So even though you haven't written a YA novel, as I've said a few times, it is a book of a great crossover potential, and the characters are young people. And also, sometimes when you tell young people that particular books are for adults, they want to read them. You definitely succeeded. We have one final question. I found your portrayal of the relationships and the family while the Holodomor was raging was particularly moving. One doesn't often see that level of presenting emotional interactions under such incredibly difficult circumstances, of having to make unimaginable decisions within those relationships. Could you talk about that a bit?
I think in periods of high stress like that, and when there's sacrifices being made, all emotions are heightened. And some of those relationships that happened and situations that happened were inspired by things that happened in my family, with my great grandmother and her sister. And even though it didn't take place during the Holodomor, I used those relationships and those choices that my great grandmother had to make for her life that changed the trajectory of her life. And I took inspiration of that, and I wanted to imagine what it was like for her and create a happy ending for her. And well, you wouldn't necessarily think a happy ending can come from a book like this. Emotionally, in some ways, I hope I gave her that happy ending that I don't know that she got in real life. That's very vague, but I didn't want to give too much away about parts of the book.
You just want everyone to read it.
Yeah. I mean, I can give plenty of spoilers. I just didn't know if I should or not.
That's a good idea. Yeah, but I also agree that the depiction of family dynamics in this novel is powerful, and these difficult choices, without spoilers, there are many difficult choices. Some of these choices they really make you think and rethink history and individual choices, and the importance of individual choices. Erin, thank you once again for joining us and sharing your creative process with us. Thank you all for the thought-provoking questions. Thank you, our webinar techs, for the amazing jobs you do. Thank you to Sophia for organizing and coordinating these webinars, for always being there for us. And thank you to Valentina Curley for introducing the webinars and for your important summary remarks. And talking about summary remarks, Valentina, could we have your closing remarks, please?
Yes, definitely. But I have a question for Erin before all this closes. I wanted to know, out of the 16 languages, was it translated into Ukrainian? And if so, what is the reaction of Ukrainians living in Ukraine? Have you heard anything?
It's not been translated into Ukrainian yet. I don't know if it will be or not. So I've had reactions from Ukrainian Americans, but I've not had reactions from Ukrainians.
I see. Well, I certainly hope that it will be translated into Ukrainian.
It'll be an honor.
Well, anyway, I would like to extend our thanks to Erin Litteken for her novel, The Memory Keeper of Kyiv, and for talking with us today about her wonderful book. Thank you also to Mateusz Litteken for gracing us with his knowledge and expertise in hosting this seminar. Congratulations to you both for doing a fabulous job. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
For everyone who came to participate tonight, in the chat, you will find a list you can download before you leave of resources about the Holodomor that are suitable for different grade levels that you may be interested in using in your classrooms. This is our final Thursday evening webinar in our year-long series. We are sad that they are over, but look forward to future webinars we hope to develop. And we'll come back to authors who write other books as well. For additional information about the Holodomor and to view all the recordings in this webinar series, and there were 6 of them, please visit our website, education.holodomor.ca. It also has plenty of teacher resources and teaching materials for your use. If you don't have it already, please download our annual Holodomor Memorial Day pamphlet, which highlights an announcement that could be used in schools on Holodomor Memorial Day, which this year happens to fall on Friday, the 24th, the fourth Friday in November. And if you need a text for teaching the Holodomor, there is information about my book titled Holodomor in Ukraine for teachers and students on our website as well, and I would be happy to send one copy to you. Also, please consider applying for our annual HREC Educator Award for Holodomor lesson plan development, which is on our website. The deadline to apply is May the 1st, 2024. With this, we shall be ending the webinar today, and thank you all for participating and for your interest in the Holodomor. As you know, Russia's war on Ukraine continues now into its 21st month. And we see in that some of these things happening in today's war are very similar to what happened to Ukrainians during the Holodomor in the 1930s. For example, according to the UN and Ukrainian government officials, at least almost 20,000 children have been recorded to have been deported from orphanages or taken from their parents and placed in youth camps in Russia or adopted and are being re-educated as Russians. But this number is just the recorded and verifiable number. Many specialists in Ukraine and beyond believe that the actual numbers run into the hundreds of thousands. We see that in this and in other ways, the Kremlin's genocidal intentions for Ukraine and its people remain the same as they were in the 1930s during the Holodomor, openly proclaimed today by Putin, even before the invasion of Ukraine, in which he states his aims are to eradicate Ukrainian identity and Ukraine as a state and a country. Today's Russian war on Ukraine demonstrates the resilience and the resilience of the Ukrainian people and the relevance for studying the Holodomor to better understand current events. We are grateful to all the authors who have spoken to us and written novels about the Holodomor for your creativity and skills and for bringing awareness to today's youth about the Holodomor. Thank you and good night, and Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.